Hey everyone, I'm Barrett Nelson from On the Trail Creations in Fairbanks, Alaska. Many of you know that I love free motion quilting, like on this Teresa Asconi panel, and I want you to love it too. So I've made a video with some of the basics and some tips and tricks. I always tell my students I can give you information, but I can't give you experience. So it does take some practice, so don't give up, but hopefully this will get you started.
First of all, I just want to explain a little bit about what free motion stitching is. Normally when you sew, the feed dogs, which is these little teeth right here, push against the foot and they push the fabric through so you can sew in pretty much a straight line. So free motion sewing, we want to be able to go in any direction and move the fabric any way we want, which is basically like drawing with the sewing machine. So there are a couple things that we need to do to make our sewing machine able to do that. So that's what I'm going to show you next. There's basically two things that you need to do to set your machine up for free motion stitching. One of them is to drop those feed dogs out of the way. That every machine is different as far as how they do that. Some of them can't even, and that's okay. You can try it anyway. That's not actually super important, but it does make it a little bit easier. If you can't get them out of the way, sometimes there's a plate that goes over them, and sometimes you can, if you set the stitch length to 0, then they bounce up and down, but they don't push through, and so then they're less annoying that way also. The next step is to put on a free motion foot. There are several different ones. This one is my favorite right here. That's just a circle with a little piece missing, but there are lots of other types. Let's see, that one's a complete circle. This one is also a circle. Sometimes it's called a darning foot. It's pretty much the same thing. And then this one, sometimes regular ones have a clear plastic foot like this too, but this one has a hole to feed a piece of yarn in. It's a yarn couching free motion foot. So you can attach yarn while you're doing your free motion, which is super fun. But I like this one the most because I don't have to thread my thread through the hole all the time. But if I'm ever stitching on something that's fuzzy or has things for those little toes to get caught on, then I will switch it to one like this because then it can't get caught on anything. Another little note about the foot, as you can see, the fabric moves freely, so even when the foot is down, it's not putting pressure on the fabric or on the feed dogs, which are also turned off. But it is really important to remember to put your foot down still, because the lever that puts the foot down also engages the tension on the thread. So some machines won't even let you sew without doing that, but it's really important to make sure that you did put your foot lever down. Otherwise, if your machine does let you sew, there's no controlling how fast the thread comes out, so it makes a snarly mess, usually on the bottom. If you end up with a snarly mess on the bottom, probably the top thread is the culprit. All right, I have my free motion foot on my machine, and my feed dog's lowered, and I've got, for the demonstration, I've got 2 different colors of thread on there, so we'll be able to more easily see what's happening with the tension. And then I have a quilt sandwich, which is 3 layers with batting in the middle. That's all that really matters, and really there's even more things you can do it on. But I just have muslin and batting and a layer of interfacing at the bottom. So the most important thing to understand about free motion stitching is that when the feed dogs are not in charge, that means you are in charge of the stitch length. So normally the machine does that for us. We can control how long the stitches are, but with free motion, it's entirely up to you. What determines the stitch length is the relationship between how fast you're moving your hands and how fast the machine is going. So let's just try it a little bit and I'll show you what I mean. So I've kind of learned how fast I need to go compared to how fast the machine is going. But if you notice, the machine is going pretty fast, but my hands are not going that fast. So that's the most important thing to remember, is that the machine can be fast, but your hands still don't have to be going fast. People get kind of panicky when the machine's going that fast. So then they don't want to run the machine fast, but then they get big stitches that are kind of hard to do round corners with. So if I move my hands too slow, my stitches are not going to be smooth. My corners are not going to be smooth. My stitches will be too big. So you can still move your hands slow, but you just need to make the machine go a little bit faster. So my hands are about the same. The machine's going faster, and so my curves are smoother. If you have the machine going too fast and your hand's too slow, it'll do the opposite. Super tiny stitches that will just about perforate your fabric, and that's not the goal either. So it's finding that balance, and a good trick for helping you do that is if your machine has a speed control on it, set it to a speed that you're comfortable. If the foot pedal is floored all the way, and then you just push it down and you don't have to think about that, you can just change how fast you're moving your hands and then control the stitches that way. Eventually you just kind of get used to the rhythm, and you can go even faster if you want. So if I speed up the machine, then I have to also speed up my hands a little bit. But you can stop at any point and, you know, figure out where you're going, and so that's what we're going to talk about next. So besides the stitch length, the only other thing that you really have to think about is what you're doing, what direction, where you're going, what pattern you're making, what design. So when I practice, for some reason I pretty much always start out with writing my name. And that's just a good way to practice. It ends up looking a lot like your handwriting, which I think is kind of funny, but our brains just do that. But then for quilting a quilt, a lot of people start with the basic kind of stippling design, which is kind of like puzzle pieces. And so you just kind of meander, it's also called meandering, just kind of meander around. So the only thing to remember there is to try to change directions periodically. So you can kind of have in mind an area that you're trying to fill, but don't just keep going back and forth like this or you end up with a worm. So you can, even if you haven't quite filled your space, you can still go a different way and then go back in and fill the rest of that hole. But just changing which direction you're going, you can do a couple knobs in one direction, but then go a different way. Make a couple knobs that way. There are patterns that you can follow. There's lots of ways to mark a design on your fabric and follow that. And if that's easier for you, just try it. Just try following a design or making it up as you go. And for some people, one is easier, and some people, the other one is easier. So the next thing we're going to talk a little bit about is tension. All right, I've zoomed in even more, so hopefully you can see the stitches. On the top side of this, the tension looks good. I'm not seeing any bobbin thread coming to the top, so that's what we want. But let's look on the back side and see what's happening. Okay, over here is what I was doing earlier, and that looks pretty good. There's not much top thread coming through to the back at all. And so if you were making a quilt, that's where you would want your tension to be. You just want to keep adjusting it so that you can't see either thread on the wrong side. So, but most of what I do is decorative, and so I want to make sure my front looks good and I don't really care what the back looks like. So I will often loosen my top tension a little bit so that it looks like this on the back. I can see a little bit of my top thread coming through, and that way I know it's going to look nice on the front. There's not going to be any bobbin thread pulling up. Sometimes there are times that you want the bobbin thread to pull up. We can talk about that in a thread sketching video sometime, or thread painting. There's all kinds of fun things you can do. But for normal quilting, you want your tension to be balanced. Most of the time you can do that by just adjusting the top one. You don't usually have to mess with your bobbin tension at all. But just think of them as playing tug of war. If the top one is showing on the back, that means the bobbin is pulling too hard, and so you want to tighten the top so it can pull a little bit harder too and pull itself back up. And for me to get it to look like this, I normally have to loosen the top a little bit so that the bottom can pull it through more, and have it just make sure it's going to look good on the front. Okay, that's pretty much the basics of free motion stitching. Another tip, if you were actually doing this on a quilt, is that you want to keep your quilting pretty much evenly distributed. You don't want to do a really tight little design in one area and a big loose design in another area, because your quilt might not lay flat. Quilting draws up the fabric a little bit, and And so in order to have it all end up flat, you want to have a fairly even amount of quilting throughout the whole project. So now I'm just going to demonstrate just a couple more designs for you to try. One that I get asked a lot about is this kind of swirly design, but it's really not too hard, so I'm going to show you how to do that right now. First you just make a circle, or most of a circle, and then start working your way into the inside, but the only trick is to leave yourself room to get back out. So you want to make your spiral on the way in twice as far apart as what you want them to end up. And then you have a path to get back out. And you just go to a new spot, make another circle, work your way in, and leave yourself room to get back out. You can vary the size of your spirals if you want. You can vary the direction by, although I don't think they really look that much different. Go in opposite directions. So you can also do this with squares. But again, leave yourself room to get back out. Or a triangle. Probably a lot of different shapes. So there's that one. Another stitch that I get asked about a lot is this kind of, I don't know, kind of looks like fire or sometimes wind. And the trickiest part on this one is just to make the points sharp. So let me show you what happens there. Let's do a little bit of wavy and change direction. You just want to come to just a split-second hard stop when you get to a place where you want to change direction. So tell your brain stop. If you don't, here's what happens. You get wavy, rounded corners. I'm also not paying a great deal of attention right now to varying the lengths, but that's another thing to pay attention to. Have them end at different spots, and you can go back. Go in the spot that didn't get filled in all the way. My head up and down when I do this. Should have made a video so you could see my head too. So that one just takes a little bit of practice. All right, this pebble one is another one that I get asked about a lot. It takes a long time to do, and if you want it to look really nice, it also takes a little bit of practice. It makes pretty dense quilting, so it might not be great for a quilt that you want to remain soft and flexible, but for art quilts this is great. And if you don't care that it doesn't look perfectly whatever, then it's easier to do. So it's very tricky to get it to look really, really nice because you have to do a lot of backtracking. But basically, again, just make a circle, and then if you see, I'm already falling off my line. You just need to backtrack to a new spot. Go around them a couple times if you want. Sometimes that actually looks better because it looks more intentional. But just a lot of backtracking. I tend to quilt really fast, so I'm not all that good at backtracking. And then I always have to remind myself to make different shapes of pebbles too. Mine tend to be all the same size circles. So bigger ones, smaller ones. Long ones. I've done a lot of pebbles. If I'm not super careful, they're still very messy. Variegated thread is another way to disguise messy pebbles. But they still look cool. It just takes a lot of practice to get them to look super nice. So I hope that was enough information to get you started, and I hope you will try it, and I hope you will send me pictures after you do.